That's not something I've ever done before. Leave the piano and come up to the... That feels kind of weird. Shake it off, shake it off. It's awesome, though. I'm so honored and excited to be speaking this morning. These kids are heading off to their next-gen spaces. It was wonderful having them in here. This is a big morning, you guys. We're planning this morning. We're like, wow, it's like music and communion and baptism, right? That thing's over there. Amazing, amazing. Our church really celebrates these moments, and it's just an exciting party, right? We're allowed to party on these mornings. So I'm excited to get to that. But first, we're going to talk a little bit about women in the Bible. So this series has gone on, is it 7 weeks? 7 weeks talking about women in the Bible. And it's called Scripture Reimagined, right? Putting women at the center. If it's your first time here today, get ready for a wild ride, because we are tackling a subject that can be a little controversial, yeah? And when Shane and I were talking about this a ton, 7 weeks of having a series about women in the Bible only spoken by men seemed a little odd. So I got my arm twisted behind my back not really, no, to come up and give a little bit of a female perspective. So thanks for being open. Yeah, I love that yes, and it sounded like a male voice. Yes, that was Bill. Thank you very much. Awesome. So we're going to talk about some stories this morning, and I'm going to start with a story, and what I would like to do is take you completely outside of our faith culture. Just for a minute, step outside of our faith culture and do something a little bit different, and for that I need a little bit of help. In my house, we tell stories all the time, and I have 4 children, and I like to have kids on my lap when I tell a story. So would you help me welcome my littlest child, who's not so little anymore. This is Echo. She's going to come on up. Echo! I'm going to put my glasses on. And she's going to sit on my lap. This is what this easy chair is for. And we are going to read a story together. Will you have a seat? Oh, thank you. You know, she's not too big to sit on my lap, right? Thank you for sitting on my lap. So, we began with a story out of a book that I love called Braiding Sweetgrass. And it goes like this. She fell like a maple seed, pirouetting on an autumn breeze. A column of light streamed from a hole in the sky world, marking her path where only darkness had been before. It took her a long time to fall. Hurtling downward, she saw only dark water below. But in that emptiness, there were many eyes gazing up at the sudden shaft of light. As it grew closer, they could see that it was a woman, arms outstretched, long black hair billowing behind as she spiraled toward them. The geese nodded at one another and rose together from the water in a wave of goose music. She felt the beat of their wings as they flew beneath to break her fall. Far from the only home she'd ever known, she caught her breath at the warm embrace of soft feathers as they gently carried her downward. And so it began. The geese could not hold the woman above the water for much longer, so they called a council to decide what to do. Resting on their wings, she saw them all gather. Loons and otters, swans, beavers, fish of all kinds. A great turtle floated in their midst and offered his back for her to rest upon. Gratefully, she stepped from the goose wings onto the dome of his shell. And the others understood that she needed land for her home. They discussed how they might serve her need. The deep divers among them had heard of mud at the bottom of the water, and they agreed to go find some. One by one, the animals offered to help: otter, beaver, sturgeon. But the depth, the darkness, and the pressures were too great for even the strongest of swimmers. They gasped for air and returned with their heads ringing. And soon only little muskrat was left, the weakest diver of all. His small legs flailed as he worked his way downward, and he was gone a very long time. They waited and waited for him to return, fearing the worst. And before long, a stream of bubbles rose with the small, limp body of the muskrat. He had given his life to aid this helpless human. Then the others noticed that his paw was tightly clenched, and when they opened it, there was a small handful of mud. Turtle said, "Here, put it on my back, and I will hold it." Sky Woman bent, and she spread the mud with her hands across the shell of the turtle. Moved by the extraordinary gifts of the animals, she sang in thanksgiving, and she began to dance, her feet caressing the earth. The land grew and grew as she danced her thanks, from the dab of mud on Turtle's back until the whole earth was made, not by Sky Woman alone, but from the alchemy of all the animals' gifts coupled with her deep gratitude. Together they formed what we know today as Turtle Island, our home. Thanks so much. Head on back. Time for bed, Echo. I think it's a beautiful story. Do you? Yeah. That is the creation story of the Potawatomi Nation and several other tribes that live up in the northern region of the United States near the Great Lakes. And that story is 10,000 years old or thereabouts, dated back to right about the time they first have evidence for people in that region of the world. So they've been telling their story around campfires and at bedtime, and probably not on seats like that, but maybe for 10,000 years, right? And I think it's really beautiful and incredibly poetic. And listening to that story, maybe you find it really primitive, pre-science, right? Trying to explain the world before we had a sense of how molecules moved around and stuff like that. Maybe. But I want to suggest to you that stories are tools, and they're powerful tools. They weave the fabric of a shared culture, and they give us a sense of identity. Would you agree with that? Yeah. They teach us about shared values, and incredibly important, they teach us about belonging. So I haven't had a chance to speak to any Potawatomi people, but I imagine if I did, I could ask them, do you literally believe that a woman fell out of a shaft of light in the sky and smeared some mud on the back of a turtle? I don't know what they would say to that. I don't know in 2025. But I do know that they would agree that this story is incredibly valuable for them because it reinforces values of their culture. They say that it provides the original instructions, that's what they call it, and those values for them are respect for the earth, interdependence of species, generosity, reciprocal gift-giving, and gratitude for nature's abundance. It places humanity in a fixed place on this huge, unknowable timeline, right? And the cool thing about it, I didn't even think about this honestly when I was reading this myth in the first place, but the main character being a woman, and she's pregnant in this story, right? So she is the common mother for the Potawatomi people, and for them, all of humanity. So if they go forth into the world and they meet any man or woman, child, they are all brothers and sisters. So I wonder how this makes you feel. I remember being Echo's age, or probably a little bit younger, and I was utterly enchanted by stories like this. I was a big reader, and I loved the stories from all the different cultures, right? The Greeks, gods and goddesses, the Hindus with all their arms, and all these really interesting, amazing, colorful stories. I thought that they were fascinating, and I imagined myself in these stories. I imagined myself being stretched beyond the bonds of my imagination, right? And creating any sort of life that I wanted to create for myself as a girl. I went to church in Chico. I grew up in Chico. I went to the best church in Chico. I'm going to say that unabashedly because, this is the reason, because it's pink. That's why. It's the United Methodist Church right in downtown Chico, if any of you spend any time there. Actually, I was crushed. I took my kids just recently, a couple weeks ago, and the church got painted, right? It's like a tan. Tan over pink? I really don't understand the choices. But anyway, I loved going there as a kid. And beautiful services, and then we did just like this. The kids would go off to their spaces by themselves, and we had Sunday school. And I remember looking forward to the donut I was going to get at the end of service, because that's what my dad would always do for us. A tradition I've carried on with my kids, by the way. And this older woman would sit us all down in a circle, and she would tell us stories, as you do. I remember there being a preponderance of male pronouns in these stories. I remember most of the stories being around male characters, right? And stories where men had agency and moved through God's will and did their things. And I thought that they were beautiful and interesting, but I didn't dream about myself in those stories necessarily. I didn't see myself in those stories. I think that that's interesting. I think that if you've been in Christianity for a while, some of us in here have and some of us in here haven't. but you sort of just drink that water, right? You sort of drink the water of like this kind of male-dominated narrative through the Bible and into our culture. And maybe don't think too much about it. But as I get older, I think about it more. And I remember very impressionable being this age, Echo's age, and as I said, I did a ton of reading, and I remember reading this poem that has stuck with me all these years. And the poem was about Adam and Eve, and it was about Adam being connected to God. And if you take the word God and you add an O, you get the word good, right? So Adam and God, some of you are nodding, maybe you've read this poem. And over here on this side, it was Eve. You change the letters around in Eve's name a little bit, and you get evil, right? And she is responsible for the downfall, and she is responsible for the curse. And Adam is connected to God, and it's good, and Eve is connected to evil. And we don't tell that story that way in this church, right? We don't. But some people do. And it definitely permeates our culture to a degree that a little girl could feel that on the inside. And I think, how does that make her feel? I think it goes past that. I think language is really powerful. We have to be really careful how we use it. And as a little girl, if you didn't grow up as a little girl, some of us in here did, you're very used to this, right? You're used to being in school and hearing about mankind and humanity, those words, and even the word history. You hear that word history and you think his story, yeah? And it's even been presented to us that way, inside and outside of church. So I'd like to make a stand today and say that that is not what that word actually means. I have a slide for you. The word history, it comes from an ancient Greek word. It's a noun, eotopia. It means knowledge obtained by inquiry. The Latin for that is historia. That looks a little bit more familiar, right? Etymologically, that means where the word comes from. It is unrelated to the possessive pronoun, his. We haven't gotten used to the word her story, or maybe even our story. That's not entering our lexicon anytime soon, probably. But it's useful to know that the word history encompasses all of us. History, as a rule, is written by the powerful, right? It's written by the winners. Those are the people that write the history books. And typically that's been men, right, of dominant cultures. And the Bible was written by men. The things that were decided to be put into the Bible, those councils were all men, right? So it would make sense that through history we would have this male-dominated perspective. And I wonder, given that information, what your choices are sticking around in Christianity, particularly if you're a woman. I mean, several of us are in here, right? So we've made the choice. I'm up here standing. I think one of the options that you're faced with this information is acceptance. It's tradition, right? It's a little safer, and maybe it's even a little comforting. I mean, we find Bible stories to be comforting, I think. Some of us do. Maybe we remember sitting like this and hearing these Bible stories, right? And some groups have really chosen to double down on this. For example, the Southern Baptist Convention, right, which is the largest Protestant organization in the entire country. And Shane's talked about this quite a bit, where they have really gone far in option number one, right? Even to the degree of absolutely unequivocally denying women any place in the power hierarchy of the church. You can volunteer, but you can't be the pastor, right? And so we have that option. We have another option, maybe some women that I've definitely talked to, the option would be to just toss it out, to just walk away, right? Forget it. I've had people ask me outside of church, why are we still telling these stories of harlots and concubines, of roof bathers, these silent and submissive, well-behaved women? They don't make history, right? So the story goes. You've seen that bumper sticker? So if you're sitting here, maybe you're in camp number one, and I have no judgment for that. There's a lot of reasons. Maybe you've made peace with this stuff. Maybe you choose to ignore some of it. Maybe you choose to skip over the yucky parts. And maybe you're just sick of the discussion. I mean, maybe you said, why do we need to hash this out? I've heard people in this church even having lobby discussions and stuff, talking about wanting church to be safe from politics, and all the wrestling with this gender stuff. I just want a place that I can be safe from all the questions and all the wrestling. But the world is moving on. It's moved on in lots of ways. And church, as an institution in the way that it's been for hundreds of years, it's dying. I'd like to look at the state of affairs. So I love how Ron says, let's pull off to the side of the road. We pull off to the side of the road. The New York Times is a paper that I read all the time. And they're doing a series right now, actually, right here. This is just a few weeks back, in April. And it's called Believing. And it's a whole series of articles about believing and faith in America. It's been fascinating to read. I've really enjoyed it. So there's the digital headline. Some of the information from these articles. In the last several decades, and Shane has talked about this a lot, around 40 million Americans have left churches. 40 million people, right? At least a third of our population identifies currently as having no religion. When you think about that, 1 out of 3 people that you meet have no religion. And in the last 30 years, America has undergone a period of intense secularization, right? That means separated from religion. It's been a massive transformation socially, right? Think about the founding of the country in those early years, all the way up until now. Massive. One nation under God to one nation under the dollar. I'm not sure. This has coincided, think about like the 90s and the early 2000s, the explosion of the internet, yeah? And also a global focus on capitalism as the single most dominant force in politics and economics and philosophy. I wonder, how we doing? How we doing with that? Let's take a look from this article. People are unhappier than they've ever been. The country is in an epidemic of loneliness. Do we know this? It's not just secularism that's to blame, but those without religious affiliation in particular rank lower on key metrics of well-being. They feel less connected to others, less spiritually at peace, and they experience less awe and gratitude regularly. That's from an article called Americans Haven't Found a Satisfying Alternative to Religion. And I want to know, what about our women? Since we're talking about it. We women are typically really good at making connections, right? We're really good at weaving that social fabric together. We're good at telling stories. And we haven't stopped doing things like that. We love stories. Lots of women join book clubs. Anybody in a book club? Do you actually read in your book club? You're laughing. Why? What else would you be doing at your book club? Most of my friends that are in book clubs is just actually a wine drinking club. But we can bring a book and make sure like we look really official. People turn to gym classes, CrossFit, yoga, right? There's a thing that came out a few years ago now, Soul Cycle. Anybody heard of that? Yeah, I find that really interestingly named, don't you? I'm going to cycle my way to find my soul. But we join these things, you know? We look for ways to connect. We look for meaning. I found a statistic totally interesting, which is that more than a third of women under 35 right now, 2025 in this country, have an astrology app on their phone, and they use it daily. I mean, why? Maybe it's fun, but looking for meaning, right? Looking for meaning. And we want to feel connected. We want to feel like life makes sense in some way. So here's another quote from an article, Moments That Shape Our Beliefs. Go back one, please. Which is, we want to feel connection. We want to feel like life makes sense. And finding these things alone or creating them from scratch in Soul Cycle and yoga and book clubs and can be really, really hard. It can be really hard. So, after all that, here's something really crazy. Here's something really interesting. After 30 years, from the 90s up until now, people are coming back to church. You know that? Maybe you do, because you probably listen to the news and pay attention, and there's been all this talk now, right, of religion kind of coming back into the discussion. It's been all over the place. And I think people are really pessimistic about the future more than ever. There's a lot of chaos. There's a ton of data coming our way. We're worried about climate change. We're worried about the world changing. People are longing to believe in something, right? They want to know that their lives have a purpose. So here's stuff that you know in this room, and thank you for putting that slide up right away. Those with a religious affiliation are statistically healthier and happier. Am I preaching to the choir here? less likely to be depressed, die by suicide, alcoholism, cancer, blah, blah, blah. They have better social connections. They're more civically engaged, yeah? For better or for worse, more people in America are bringing God into the national discussion, from politics to policy to mainstream merchandising. Of course, we have to go there. From an article called America Wants a God. Speaking of mainstream merchandising, one of the top-selling pieces of Christian merchandising I found was this. It was interesting. This is a shirt you can buy right now, selling like hotcakes. It says, "The man church, be a man, follow Jesus." Right? Which brings me to my next point. What about the women? Yeah, you want that shirt? It's pretty funny. The man church. What about the women? What about the women? There's a website that's really informative and interesting called the Survey on American Life. It was previously published in a book. Now it's on the interwebs, where you can look up decades and decades of research. And they've kept track of trends in American life for, a long time. And they said this. I looked at their website just last week, so let's peek at that, which says young women are leaving church in unprecedented numbers. Check out this red underlined piece with me. In fact, for as long as we've conducted polls on religion, men have consistently demonstrated lower levels of religious engagement, but something has changed. A new survey reveals that the pattern has now reversed. A poll from the end of last year said that over 2/3 of young women, now we're into 2/3, said that they do not believe that churches treat men and women equally. And we know that many denominations do not allow women to serve in leadership positions. And we know that the church hasn't significantly changed its male-dominant narratives in the stories. So for girls and women, this is a quote, raised to believe that they can do anything men can do, these messages are becoming more and more difficult to digest. This is a super interesting cultural moment, isn't it? And we've seen this thing happening, at least in America, about masculinity being threatened. There's this talk about toxic masculinity. I have daughters and sons, and I've spent some time worrying about how to raise my daughters, and now I'm spending some time worrying about raising my son as well, right? It's a little bit squishy. It's all a little squishy. And it seems to be that men are coming back to church. I wonder if it's because church has a more structured approach to gender roles. There's an appeal to that, right? There's an appeal, especially in certain parts of our country. Men can come and be unapologetically men. This woman named Cheryl Summers, she's in the Southern Baptist Convention. She's trying to effect change from within. And she's been to convention after convention pushing for women to have a place. I don't know how successful she's been, but she's working really hard. I have a picture of her, and she has this quote. She's the blonde up there. It says, "These ideas are out of step with the experiences and ambitions of young women. There's tremendous cognitive dissonance for a woman of faith when she experiences the glass ceiling and walls in her place of worship." I have all kinds of feelings when I hear that. And I think for me, just being super honest and standing up in front of you, I don't really want either one of the options I presented to you. I don't really want to just swallow it and look away from the yucky parts. I don't really want to do that. But I'm also here standing in front of you, right? And playing on the worship team. I'm not walking away. So what is the other option? And for me, I can say the option is wrestling. It's wrestling. Shane always talks about when he has trouble with things and he's wrestling, he turns into the Hulk, right? Yeah. We don't really want that to happen in front of our eyes, but hopefully it won't. So maybe I'm going to turn into Hulk Hogan, okay? So we can be Hulk twins, right? It's this wrestling. It's this, like, just working through it and facing it head on. You know, if I want to stay, I have to wrestle with the stories that we share as a culture. And I have to think about who's created the messaging, whether I want to listen to the messaging that other people have created and how they frame those narratives. I have to find the place where the stories that we tell and my belief in a loving God meet, which I think is somewhere here in the mess of this crazy world. So I want to stay, and I want to argue, and I want to discuss, and I want to participate, and I want to tell stories to my daughters and to my sons. Son, I only have one. Phoenix is like, what? And I want to help the younger generation stretch the boundaries of their dreams. I want them to feel good about being children of God. Not like Adam, God, good, but all of us, God, good. And I will tell you this, God needs girls. The church needs girls. Yeah. That same website, the Survey on American Life, they talk about this. They talk about women and statistics, and I love this stuff. Women, maybe this is a big fat duh to you today, but women lead in many areas in worship and community life, right? They lead community building, volunteer efforts, bake sales, and all the things, right? Typically the women, typically. And research finds that Americans that were raised in religious households, they credit their mothers for their faith. And do you know that if people are raised in households with mixed religion, dad does something different from mom, statistically they're more likely to go with the religion of their mother. And I think that's because women tell the stories, right? We got the little ones on our laps. My husband is also good at telling stories at bedtime, so I'm not going to cut him out. But oftentimes it's the women, right? We hold those things. We weave together that blanket that we wrap our children in. And it's worth thinking about what stories we tell and how we tell them. So I want to go back to the New York Times. In this Believing series, they talk about what religion does for us. It's 3 B's, kind of catchy. Beliefs about the world, behaviors to follow, right? And belonging to a community or a culture. Belonging. America Wants a God is the name of that article. And I love reading, if you scroll through, on your phone or whatever, the comments after online articles. I like the comments sometimes better than I like the article. Like, it's so fun to watch people hash things out, and fight each other. People really latched onto this last thing. There were a lot of comments about this, about wanting to belong, particularly from women. And they said that they wanted to belong in rich and profound and sustained ways that last. And I think the best example, telling stories and belonging in a culture, the best example of that is Jesus, frankly. That guy told some good stories, am I right? I think that he wrestled with some of this stuff that I'm talking about right now. I think he wrestled with how much of the past to bring forward and how to frame it. I think he wrestled with that. He definitely demonstrated breaking some ancient laws, the Sabbath, for example, right? Doing stuff on the Sabbath. Reaching out to different people he probably was not supposed to, Gentiles and lepers and tax collectors, all those folk, right? Reaching out and breaking the rules. He was forging a new way of living. And he made a habit of seeing people for exactly who they were. Men and women and children and elderly and all the people that came into his path, right? With no preconceived divisions. I think I can look back through our American history. As a girl, I look back and I see women of just great faith, incredible faith, doing really similar things, like Harriet Tubman and Eleanor Roosevelt and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, yeah? Maya Angelou, Dolly Parton. These are great women. These are women that we're going to tell stories about for generations to come. We're going to honor their shared values. We're going to see ourselves in their lives. They made new stories, and we can make new stories. So then, should we tell the old stories to our children? One New York Times writer in this series concluded her article on faith with this. She said, "It feels like something is changing. Maybe the culture is shifting. Maybe we're starting to recognize that it's possible to be both believing and discerning after all." So let's do that. Let's be both believing and discerning. Maybe we can do this without forgetting or covering up or even reimagining the past, right? Maybe we can just face it for what it was. We can decide as we carry forward into what is. So with that thought in mind, I'd like to turn and face this Bible of ours and dig real deep in it and find something for the ladies. You okay with that? Yeah. I want to go all the way back to the Old Testament and finish with another story. So if you don't mind, I'm going to invite my youngest to come on back up here. Echo, will you come on back up? All right, this time, we're going all the way back. Come on and have a seat. Way back into the Old Testament, right? Back into the good stuff. This is one of the oldest stories in the Bible. All the way back as early as the 12th century BC. So thousands of years ago. There was definitely no women's lib yet, people. So this is a story I'm actually supposed to be focusing on today. It's good I'm getting to it at the end of my teaching here. It's a story that truly has women at the center. They're not living on anyone's terms but their own. It's a story of two women that you might not expect to be powerful and two men that you might not expect to be scared. So you ready for this? We're going to go all the way back to the book of Judges. So, Echo. We're going to begin with a woman that was known far and wide throughout the land. And I want to tell you that she wasn't known for her incredible beauty. She wasn't known for who she was married to. She wasn't known for who she was going to give birth to. She was no one's conquest. She was no one's concubine. And she was nobody's fool. We're going to talk about Deborah. And Deborah was a judge. So long before Jesus was born, Israel was a group of tribes, right? They existed for about 300 years, and they weren't united by a king. And these tribes were governed by judges. So I'll explain to you, Echo, and those of you that want to hear, that the Israelites were famous for this, right? They would get really full of themselves and decide that they could take things into their own hands and start worshiping false idols and going all amok and whatever. And they would end up being in slavery to other people. And then they would be horribly oppressed and cry out for their God. And God would have mercy. And he would bring up a judge to rule them and save them and bring them back into line. And it was wonderful, right? And they worshiped their Lord. And then as they did, they lost their way again, right? So it was like generationally, they kept making the same mistake. So over the period of 300 years, we had 12 judges that rose up to lead the people. And Deborah was one of them. She's number 4, and she's the only woman in 300 years. So here's the scene. The Israelites, of course, have sort of lost their way. They've been sold into the hands of Jabin, who's the king of Canaan. But he's not the most important male character. The guy you really want to pay attention to is a guy named Sisera, who is a baddie. That's what my kids say. He's a baddie. He was a nasty one. He was an oppressive commander. He had 900 chariots. That's scary. Chariots made of iron, right? And when I say he oppressed the people, he wasn't like ripping up their homework and sending them to bed. No. We're talking about like killing people's babies and doing unspeakable things to their mothers and burning entire villages to the ground and taking their harvests. This guy was really, really mean and awful. And he oppressed the Israelites for 20 long years. And they cried out to their God. And God raised Deborah as the judge. And she was also a prophet. And she heard the voice of God. And she sent for a man named Barak, who was from the northern tribes. And he was a commander. And she said to him, "The Lord, the God of Israel, commands you. Go take with you 10,000 men and lead them up to Mount Tabor. I will lead Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army," the baddie. She said that, I'm sure. I'm just kidding. "With his chariots and his troops to the Kishon River and give him into your hands." This is the Lord speaking. "I will give him into your hands." And I love what Barak says. Barak is a strong man, right? And here's Deborah telling him what to do. And he says, "If you go with me, I'll go. But I'm not going to go if you don't go." She says, certainly I will go with you. But because of the course you are taking, in other words, because you're waffling a bit, buddy, the honor will not be yours, for the Lord will deliver Sisera into the hands of a woman. I'm not sure how he received that message. Probably not very well. But he followed directions, and he got 10,000 men, and they went to the top of Mount Tabor. And of course, Sisera heard about this rebellion and was none too pleased. So he gathered his men and his troops and chariots, and he came to the bottom of Mount Tabor. Our friend Barak, he was scared. He was so scared. And as he saw all of these troops down there in the valley with the chariots and the horses, he didn't want to go. And I love that Deborah scolds him like a mom. She says, go. This is the day the Lord has given Sisera into your hands. Has not the Lord gone ahead of you? So Barak gets brave, and he leads the men down the mountain to fight. And just then, it starts to rain. The Lord sends a massive rainstorm, and the river Kishon overflows and comes up and floods its banks, and all the chariots get mired in the mud, and all the horses get mired in the mud, and all the people get mired in the mud. And Sisera's army's going down, and Barak's army's flooding down Mount Tabor, knowing that they're going to have the advantage, and they wipe out the army. And you know Sisera? He was scared. And he turned and he ran. So, side story, there's a little tent encampment outside of this valley, and it's this other tribe, the Kenites. And Sisera runs and runs, and he's in the rain, and he's exhausted, and he's been fighting, and he's probably bloody, and he's probably a huge guy and terrifying. And he comes up to a tent and knocks on that tent flap, and you know who's in there? A woman by herself. And her name is Jael. And nobody else is in the tent. And this woman doesn't say, oh my gosh, I'm sorry, nobody's here, I can't talk to you. No, she doesn't. She says, come in. And don't be afraid. Jael knew exactly who this man was. And she knew exactly what he had been doing to the Israelites. And she knew exactly how painfully they cried out to God. And she let this man into her tent. And she said, come in, my Lord. Don't be afraid. He entered her tent, and she covered him with a blanket. I'm thirsty, he said. Please give me some water. And she didn't give him water. She opened up a skin of milk and gave him a drink. And then she covered him up. He said, stand in the doorway of the tent. If someone comes by and asks you, is anyone in there? Say no, he commands her in his manly voice, right? And she says, sure, no problem. How about you go to sleep now? And he did. And can you imagine this big, scary guy in his armor wrapped up in your tent, sleeping on your bed, and you can hear the deep breath of his sleeping, and you know what you have to do. And this woman, Jael, she walks over and picks up a tent peg and a hammer. Imagine her heart is beating in her chest. And she takes the tent peg and puts it against his temple and drives it in. She drove the peg through his temple into the ground, and he died. And just then Barak came by in pursuit of Sisera. And Jael went out to meet him. Come, she said, I will show you the man you're looking for. So he went in with her, and there lay Sisera with the tent peg through his temple, dead. I think the coolest thing of all is the end of this story, where we get this song of Deborah, where she comes back and sings. Of course, I think that's the coolest part of the story. But she sings about Jael, and she sings about herself, and she sings about this amazing story. And she says, I arose, a mother in Israel. And then she says, Jael took matters into her own hands. Jael, the most blessed of tent-dwelling women. It is a song that celebrates women. So Echo, as we close, I would like to pray. Is that okay? Will you pray with me? God, thank you so much for the story of Deborah and Jael. Thank you for the song of Deborah. and all the children that heard that song sung around the campfire for thousands and thousands of years. Thank you for planting a seed in the hearts of little girls that they can be prophets and judges and brave warriors for justice. God, some people have told this story as an example of how you use even small, insignificant people in your grand plans. But I believe, God, that you view no one as insignificant. God, will you help us to be both believing and discerning? Will you help us to represent you well in our places of worship, in our public and private spaces, and our stories? Will you help us to keep open hearts and open minds and share the love you give with those around us, making new stories together? And with humble hearts, we pray this in your name. Amen. Amen. Thanks, honey. Thank you.